Latifah's art is recording, so we are ready to begin. Okay, Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Hakoina shnei ilonos b'soich sada chaveroi. One who buys. Oh no, that was yesterday's.
That was yesterday.
Yeah,
you made me nervous there.
I'm sorry. Higdilu lo yishaba. So we were talking about if someone bought the tree but not the karka. So one tree according to a mayor, two trees according to the Tanakama, and the canopy, the tree grew and was eclipsing the field around it. The halacha is the baal of the karka does not have the right to trim the tree or to force the tree to be trimmed, because since the purchaser never bought any land, he only bought a tree. That by definition, that means the land belonging to the moicher is meshubed to the tree to keep it growing. So part of what it has to give the tree to keep it growing is space. And therefore, the moicher does not have a right to trim the tree. So the Mishnah goes on and says that what if a little branch, a sproutling, grew out of the tree, and the Mishnah makes a distinction between if it grew out of the trunk of the tree, the geza, or if it grew, so growing out of the trunk of the tree would grow out horizontally and then up, or if it grew out of the roots, which would be it grew vertically straight up out of the roots, so you don't see how it's connected to the tree because that's submerged under the earth. So what does it mean it grew out of the trunk? And what does it mean that it grew out of the roots? Anything that sees the light of day, and minageza, we said, belongs to the owner of the tree. If it doesn't see the light of day, meaning it grows up from the ground, and we don't see where it's connected to the tree, because we don't see where it's growing out of the roots, because that's all under the ground. And the mission determines that belongs to the owner of the property. What happens if you have a branch that grows out of the trunk of the tree above the ground? But let's say it's only a couple of inches above the ground. And therefore we say that belongs to the owner of the tree. But what would happen if after that happens, Dilma Maska Arashirtan, and the Rashbam tells us if there's some type of flooding, I think he describes a tsunami where the oceans overflow the property, bringing with it a lot of silt and mud. And when the oceans recede, now it looks like it's a separate tree. Now, what if he had two of these things? Or if he had bought two trees, and now this makes it look like a third tree. So now the purchaser will make a land claim and say, I bought three trees, so I'm entitled to the land around it. Which would be incorrect because really about two trees, but he's going to claim that he bought three, and therefore V'isliara. And we're going to be wrongfully taking away the property around these quote unquote three trees from the moicher. Zok the Heilige Rashbam. V'leichish zimnin demakah. Kivon do amrit min ageza. Hainu kol sheroya pnei achama v'afilu samach l'karka. Any place where you could see it growing out of the trunk, even if it's an inch from the surface of the earth, it would still be considered as part of the tree and it belongs to the lakeach. Hareu shabali ilan v'imkein heichi taken rabbanan milsa da'asi b'moichel de'pseida. By the rabbanan setting up these parameters as to what belongs to the owner of the tree, they're creating grave danger to the moicher. Why? Somebody might have one Elon in his friend's property. The Amar Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon said, anything grows out of the trunk is his. And what's going to happen is, Umaska Arashirtan, the land will be full of mud, Visakbia Hakarka, and it will raise the ground level, it'll bury some of the trunk, raising the land by a couple of inches, and now so I'm not sure how it went so fast from 1 to 3 with one geza. So if you look in the Gimel tells you to look up the Rashash, which I didn't have a chance to do, but I assume what the Rashash is going to talk about is either he already had a second tree there, he bought 2 trees according to Rabbanon, and the Geza growing out makes it look like 3. Now we're going to learn soon that if you have 3 trees that are bunched together, that's not called 3 trees. It has to be 3 trees spaced at a concentration that is sustainable. So here also, in order for me to be able to make a claim that I bought 3 trees, the Geza would have had to have moved far enough away from the tree that it'll look like it's properly spaced. So imagine you have a trunk growing out of the side of the trunk. Horizontally, maybe it goes 12, 15 feet, and then it went up. But this was all above ground. And now mud covers the surface, and now it looks like it's a separate tree. I'm going to show you we're going to learn later today how far apart these trees have to be spaced so that we could consider it like he's buying a forest and the land is included. And then when that happens, Lekech will claim that I bought 3 trees, meaning I'm entitled to the land. And wrongfully, the moicher is going to lose. It seems to be like it's 3 individual trees. What the Rabbanan should have said was, yes, it belongs to the Bala Ilan, but he's not allowed to leave it there because it could lead to a terrible peril. Rather, we should force him to cut it down right away. Okay, Zog to Gemara, Ein Chanami, and for the Gemara, Omar, Rab Nachman, Rab Nachman said, Yikoch, in fact, you have to cut it off for this reason. Rab Yochanan, Yikoch, you have to cut it down. Zog to Eliger Rashbam, Omar Rab Nachman, Yikoch, Masnisin the Katone Yochim the Gaza Shaloi, it belongs to the owner of the tree. Loishi the Chanukach V'yigda. He's not allowed to let it grow that way, because that could in fact lead to a terrible peril. He'll have to cut it, and then he can use it as firewood. Gewaltig. Zog the Hele the Gemara weiter. Amar Rab Nachman. Rab Nachman said, Naktinon, we learned from our Rabbeim, Dekel ein loy geza. A dekel, you're not entitled to geza if it grows out. What does this mean? Our Mishnah says if something grows out of the geza, the Bala Ilan gets it. This halacha does not apply to a dekel. Why? The kivan the lachbar ulasharish koi kishiyivish ilan. We know once if I buy 1 dekel and it eventually dries out and dies, it's going to be eliminated, right? I have to cut it down and then I take it out. I don't have an entitlement to plant another tree in that space. So Naktinon dekel ein lo geza. Saba Rab Zvid Lamemar. Rab Zvid thought to explain the words of Rab Nachman as follows: Ein loy geza lebal dekel. The bal dekel is not entitled to any branch that grows out of it. Why? The kivan the lamichbar ulasharish koi. Since what is the destiny of this tree? It's going to be uprooted, and taken away. So I don't really, as the buyer, I don't really have any type of a long-term hope for this situation, and therefore asuchai masech taitei. I'm a siach das from it, meaning I never really cared to be kind to anything other than this tree. I have no grand plans for any additional growth. Let's see what the Rashbam says. Asuchai masech taitei baladekel mina osid lotich minagez. The person who bought the tree never really considered that he's purchasing anything other than this exact tree. He has absolutely no grand visions of any type of growth. The Savarhu, he thinks to himself, Shema Yivish Dekel Mehera. Maybe this dekel will not last as long as they promised on the late night television commercial, how this is the most wonderful tree around. Rather, it's going to dry out much earlier. So someone buying a dekel doesn't have the greatest of hopes and doesn't really plan to get anything much other than what he purchased here. The loidami l'shari lovnis, unlike any other tree that he would buy, where the Mishnah says he does get the geza, a dekel is worse. Why? A normal tree, we learned, if you trim it and you cut it down partially, the stump will rejuvenate and continue to grow. So when you buy a regular tree, yes, you have in mind and hopes that there's going to be more growth and more growth out of this tree. Normal trees will rejuvenate themselves. Aval dekel is a much more fragile type of tree. If it dries out, you can't prune it, trim it, and then get rebirth. It's a one-shot deal. So there's it's more like a big pen versus a Parker pen. You don't have long-term hope for it. It's like a disposable thing. You buy it, however long it lasts, and done. But you're not thinking that anything's going to grow out of it. Right? We learned this Bryce a couple of blot ago that once it dies, it's done. Therefore, he's miyayish up front from anything that'll come out of it, and he never had kavana to be koina anything more than the actual tree as you see. That is how Reb Zvid explained the words of Reb Nachman of Dekel in Legeza. But Maskav lo Rapapa said that doesn't make any sense. Because we have other cases where someone assumes that all he's getting is the tree, and as soon as the tree dies, he's uprooting it. That's the same thing. Obviously, Rapapa doesn't focus on the distinction between a regular tree and a dekel, as the Rashbam just explained in Reb Zvid. The fact of the matter is, when you're buying any tree, if it's a lone tree in a property, where you don't get any property with it, your hopes are also very short term. Vikatani, and our very Mishnah says, the Yesh Legeza. So that cannot be shot in Rab Nachman, when Rab Nachman says, by Dekel Ein Legeza. Ella, Amar Papa, you know what Ein Legeza means? Very simple. Ein Legeza lebal Dekel, levishein moitzi geza. Did you ever see a palm tree grow a branch? No. So, of course, the reason why it doesn't mean halach little geza, but mitzias, it never happens. That's all Rab Nachman meant, not any big lumdus. Let's see what the Rashbam says over here. Unfortunately, Zok Papa, our Mishnah doesn't specify the halach of geza applies dafka to regular trees and not to the color. So our Tana is saying his halacha that the geza belongs to the geza belongs to the kind of the tree, no matter what type of tree it is. We're talking about who owns the geza. So I'm thinking of other things, but a couple of the geza belongs to the picture of the tree. The afalgav the lachbor ulasharish kaim. When you're just buying a lone tree, it's a temporary deal. It's going to be uprooted. Kishiyamusu when the tree dies, because we know one tree you don't buy any karka, or according to the Rabban, and even two trees you didn't buy karka. So I disagree with your pshat. Elo Amar Papa, I will tell you pshat and Rab Nachman. Don't give any loveness to the chadas, yayish, and doesn't want it. No. Elo Ein Legeza, very simple. Elo Ein Legeza lebaladagol kedegarmit v'loy mitamech. I agree to the halacha that by a palm tree there'll never be a place where the buyer of the tree gets the geza. But it's not because of your lomdus. It's very simple. You never find branches growing out of the side of the dekel. Any branches that grow out of a dekel are all the way on the top. That's why a couple of blot ago we talked about the only way to scale a dekel tree, can't climb up its branches like a standard tree. You got to scale it with a rope. In the odd chance that a branch grows out of the dekel, yes, he's Masiach Das. You know why? Because it's not normal. And therefore, when he buys it, he has never had an intention that this would happen. Even if some oddball occasion occurs, that for some reason, this tree, this dekel, does prop out a branch, that will belong to the balakaka, because there for sure, the person buying the tree would have never anticipated an extra branch there. Our mission that says you get the geza is speaking by trees that you would normally expect them to grow a branch. Our mission is not talking about a dekel, since that's such an unusual occurrence. Whatever the lekeich never imagined, never anticipated would occur, we would say that's not included in the kinyan that he bought. So, according to Reb Zvid, Kasha, Reb Zvid holds that it is a norm for a dekel to grow. an extra branch. So our Mishnah Shver, the Bechali Lama is Hamitzin Gezamari. Our Mishnah doesn't make a distinction between any tree and a decal. Mashma, it would apply to a decal. So how does Reb Zvid going to understand our Mishnah? So the Gemara. Huh? Because Reb Zvid says that it does not apply to a decal. Reb Zvid said that this does not apply to a decal. But the Mishnah doesn't make when the Mishnah says when the Mishnah says that you buy a tree, you own the decal, the Mishnah doesn't say except for a decal. How could you make an exception in the Mishnah? The Mishnah says it generally. If the Mishnah meant to exclude a decal from this equation, the Mishnah should have said excluding a decal. Our Mishnah, he's making a huge akimta. It's not stam you bought a tree. You bought a tree guaranteed for 5 years. So if you bought a tree guaranteed for 5 years, there I'm not miyayish anymore. Because even if my decal dries out, I'm going to be able to plant another one in its stead. There, in fact, the geza would be included. Let's have a look at the Rashbam. Our Mishnah is speaking about all types of trees that are moitzi geza. Basically, according to our Papa, it makes sense. We all agree that any type of tree that puts out a branch will be included in the halacha of the Mishnah. But a decal doesn't put out a branch. So that's why you can learn naturally that the Mishnah is not speaking about a decal. But according to Reb Zvid, a decal is no different than any other tree. They all put out branches. So why would you say that a decal is not included in the halacha of our Mishnah? And for the Gemara, you know why? Because in our Mishnah, in fact, a decal is included. Because our Mishnah is speaking about a case that the deal was not like a regular place where I buy a tree. As soon as it dies and shrivels, I have to cut it out and I'm done. Here, it was a 5-year guarantee on the purchase. Since the property that's housing this tree is going to be meshubad guaranteed for a minimum of 5 years, in such a case, the lakeich thinks differently. Now he already does want that. But if he buys a tree without any specific conditions, it could die in a day, and then the whole tree is lost. There, the lakeich doesn't have any grandiose plans of any type of expansion. And
dies after a couple of years.
Then he gets to plant a new tree there.
And then what happens to that tree after 5 years?
After 5, he's done.
After the 5-year period ends, the original 5.
I assume it's done. I assume his deal is over.
So you're not going to get much of a tree.
But whatever does grow, his hopes are anything that'll grow out of it. Once there's a chiyuv of land, so now the purchaser, being that I have a 5-year deal on it, so I do have plans for some expansion. I mean, it's only 5 years, not huge expansion. Now, I might be wrong. It might be that I have a 5-year guarantee, and if I plant it, I keep it.
That's what I'm
thinking. Could be that as well. I mean, it's not clear in the Rashbam.
Well, a minimum of 5.
Oh, okay, so that makes sense. It's a guarantee of 5 years.
Yeah.
But avaded the tree, even if I replanted it, I get the tree as long as it lives. Okay, that's even better. So there I have already some ambition and hope that this will grow. Okay, thank you for bringing that out. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Even on the 4th year, you want.
So halacha l'maisa, we have 2 ways to understand Rav Nachman. The mahalach of our papa is Rav Nachman says that the balt it's so rare and unusual that a palm tree should grow a geza. Our Mishnah is not referring to a palm tree. Our Mishnah is referring to normal trees that grow a geza. But by a palm tree, in fact, as Rav Nachman says, it would be no din geza because someone who buys a palm tree doesn't have any thought that something will grow out of it. However, Rav Zvid holds, it happens enough that we do consider it. We do consider it that it would work. So why ein lo geza? That's because that's only if I'm buying a tree that as soon as it dies, I don't get it. And the palm trees, as the Rashbam explains, are not as durable as other trees. Once something happens to them, they're dead and you can't use them anymore. So there's a distinction by palm trees the person will not have anything in mind to be koina geza. Our Mishnah says all trees are equal. Our Mishnah is speaking when there was a 5-year guarantee. By a 5-year guarantee, even by a palm tree, I have hopes for it, and therefore I do mean to purchase the geza, the right to the geza as well. Because Dr. Gemara Viter, kana shloisha kana karka, the kama. So you bought property. How much property do you own? Omar Abchia bar Abba, Omar Ab Yochanan, Hareza kana tachteyan. Of course, the land right below the tree, that's obvious. Uveineyan, the land in between the trees is obvious. But the chiddush is v'chutalan, you even own land for a certain radius around them. How much is the radius around them? Zakta Gemara, turning on to Pei Beis Amud Beis, Kamale Oira V'Saloi. What is this Oira V'Saloi? Zakta Helig Rashbam, Hamalaket. Oira is the person who is malaket, who is pulling the dates off the tree. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if we're speaking. I don't know what we're speaking about. It could be an apple tree. So the Rashbam is in a minute going to give us all of the different terms of picking, depending on what type of tree it is. So in English is one word, picking, but in Lashon Kodesh, picking every different type of peri has a different expression. Kamol Hamalaket. First of all, the amount of space that the malaket has to stand under the tree to grab. The saloi biyodoi, and he also has a big basket in his hand with which to gather the pears that he's gathering. So he's outside of the perimeter of the canopy. I want to make that clear. He's outside of the perimeter of the canopy. And if you look at the Rishbam at the bottom of Pei Beis Amud Aleph, Savav Ha'ilon, and what does my Bach say in Aleph? Savav Ha'ilon, V'chutza, lo mimokoim shekolin noifaisein l'chutz. Noif is the canopy of the tree. So the canopy might be a 50-foot radius, because you look at trees, some of the branches go very far. Even past that canopy, you're entitled to moloi oyer v'saloi, because you'll stand out from underneath the canopy and you'll reach and be able to pick from the canopy. So it's a pretty huge radius of property included when you are entitled to the property around you. So let's see the response again. To pick the outermost branches of the canopy, you have a right to proper space to set up to collect those pairs as well. Soon we're going to learn what the density is. Now we're first learning, once the density is right, and it's considered that you bought property, how much property do you own? We're talking about around the perimeter of the canopy, you're entitled to even more space of Mora Oil Shala. So what is the word Oira? Oira is Shaykh Lameir B'Tainim. When you're picking figs, it's called you're an Oira. If you're picking grapes, it's called a Boitzer. If you're gathering Tvua, you're called a Koitzer. If you're collecting dates, it's called Goider. And if you're collecting and harvesting olives, it's called Moisek. And by all other trees, it's referred to as a Malake B'Shari Lavins. I'm sorry? Yeah. I don't understand. The halacha is, if I buy according to the Rabbanon, who hold Moicher Be'en Yofa Moicher, if I buy a piece of property from you and it's landlocked, I have to buy a special access to get to it. Because how am I going to get to your property? You don't include access to your property. So imagine I buy a property from you and it doesn't include access to the property. So you're telling me that when I sell you a property, because when I'm telling you 3 trees, I'm selling you property, it includes so much extra space? I moicher ben your moicher. When I sell you a property, even this property with the 3 trees, you're going to have to pay me to get to those 3 trees. We're talking about it in Iran, as the Rashbam says. I'm sorry. You're giving this fellow who bought this property with the 3 trees so generously. We're not that generous. He can't even access his property without paying for access. Either he will have to fly, or he'll have to purchase access. Like we learned couple of weeks ago. The Amrinon Gabi Moicher Bar Vadus. Ben Ramach, the Rabbanan said, if you buy a bar or a dos in someone's property, you don't have access. You have to purchase access separately. He will have to buy property. So over here, when you're talking about how much space he gets to harvest his trees, the dummy lebarvados, it shouldn't be much different than the barvados, because it's a separate piece of property. When you're buying one tree, you're buying the rights to the tree. But when you're buying land, so the land that you purchased is like a regular land purchase, and their abundant holders paying raw. So if you don't automatically get access to your tree, why should you get such a lavish and generous access to it to be able to harvest it? Let's not make a mistake. These ilanos are not planted in the karka of the balasada because hareish lam karka. We look at it like you sold a piece of property that happens to have 3 trees on it. The chashivi, so that means the moicher's property is no longer mishobet to these trees. The chashivi sada ilam. We look at it like you bought a property. The bar v'dos, no different than if you bought a bar or a dos in someone else's property. You bought this piece of land and you didn't buy any access to it. The sada around the patch where these 3 trees are not meshuvah in any way to the trees of the lakeach. That we should say the name of gam l'kol tzarchei mishtabed. Once you say that the property of the moicher around is meshubah to the trees, then you could say whatever the trees would need, even access, even harvesting. Then you might be able to say that. But here it's a separate piece of property. I don't owe you anything. So if I'm not giving you access to your trees, surely I'm not giving you such a generous package where you can access it so well to harvest it. Derech to get there, that's mandatory. How you're supposed to get to it. But such a generous space to harvest, that's less of a need. So if we don't give you what you really need, access, we're going to give you what you don't need so much. Bit me up. You don't have to stand outside the perimeter and lean over so conveniently. You can climb through the tree. It's possible to pick from the tree without accessing this extra generous radius. So that is the Gemara's kasha. How could you tell me, Rabbi Yochanan, that it's Kamale Oira Vesal? Zok the Gemara, Amar Abzeira. I'm sorry. So the Gemara answers in. No, I'm not reading it. Hasha derech ein loy mole v'sar yesh loy. Zok the Gemara, derech ein loy. You know why he doesn't have derech? The arachriti. It's a separate piece of property. It's a completely separate property. So therefore, I'm not selling you access. But Oira Vesal yesh loy. But it still has Oira Vesal. No. So what is it? What's part of the question? Derech ein loy. The arachriti Oira Vesal yesh loy. So that is the kasha that Rabbi Elazar remains with a kasha on. Rabbi Elazar remains with a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, the belt. Good. I did another. I did it wrong. So we are remaining with the kasha. So Omar Abzeir, Zok Abzeir, Mediver Rabbeinu, and the Rashbam learns. Not everybody learns that, but the Rashbam learns that Mediver Rabbeinu is Rabbi Elazar Shapirish Taimoi Mishum Da'ara Achritahi. So I'm not sure if the art scroll is quoting the pshat of the Rashbam, because there's a lot of Rishonim over here. But Rabbi Zeir is saying Mediver Rabbeinu Nilman, and the Rashbam is saying that means Hagoyis Maranchberg over here, he has a whole stickle. Depending on how you goyis, it'll make a difference in Pshat and the Gemara. So I'm not sure where the art scroll or who he's referring to, because the Rashbam says Beferish Mediver Rabbeinu from Rabbi Elazar's Pshat to Pirish Taimoi Mishum the Arachriti. So he's saying that access to it is Arachriti, but more Arvisaloi is not Arachriti. Does he say who he gets it from? Because clearly from the Rashbam, it's not mashma like what you said from the art scroll. Now, if he's saying this is what the Rashbam says, then I obviously don't even know how to read Rashbam. No. Who's saying this pshat? Rabbi Elazar is saying pshat on Rabbi Yochanan of Arachriti. That's pshat on Rabbi Yochanan. So if that's pshat on Rabbi Yochanan, the words Arachriti is not a kash on Rabbi Yochanan. The Rashbam is explaining the words of Derech Einloi the Arachrita he, the Rashbam is explaining that as Pshat in Rabbi Yochanan.
That's why he could not have passage.
Right. But Rabbi Elazar Shapirish time Mishum the Arachriti. Rabbi Elazar explains it out Arachriti.
That makes sense. Derech being low makes sense.
Because Arachriti. But
That's part of the fact.
still part of,
So if he shines why you said
it's still part of the kasha. Okay.
if he bought the land in between, sure it's him. Why,
the main thing is, why does he have the land
Around it. That's the discussion. So Amar Abzera.
in between it.
Yeah, that's not a shot. Amar Abzera. Midiver Abein Nilma. From what Rabbi Eliezer is saying, Rabbi Eliezer is saying you learn the following. Shloisha Huda. It's only if you buy 3 trees where it's an arachriti, where you're buying the property, only there do you say ein lo derech. Hashnayim yeshlai. If you only bought 2 trees, according to the Rabbanan, that you don't own the land, you get a shibud in the land of the moicher, whatever you need to be able to service the trees. Hashnayim yeshlai the amarlei ba'ardi dachani. My whole tree is in your property. The same way I have a right to let it grow and let it nourish, I have a right to access it because I never bought land, but I did get the right to be able to properly enjoy my trees. So if I'm selling land, I don't get anything more than my land. But if I'm selling a tree, then I'm also including access to the tree. It seems like Rabbi Elazar will not like Shmuel, because clearly the way Rabbi Elazar is learning is moicher be'ein roya moicher, and therefore he does not include any access or anything with land that he sells. If you remember, that was the shita of the Rabbanon. But Shmuel paskins halacha Rabbi Kiva, the Amar bein moicher bein yafa moicher, and Rabbi Kiva holds that if you sell a bar vados, automatically it does include access through your property to get it. So who adin, if you sold 3 trees where you're selling them land, it would automatically include 3 trees. But from the way he's saying it, clearly he's learning that it's not going according to Rabbi Kiva. The problem with that is how could you learn our mission not according to Rabbi Kiva when your Rebbe Shmuel said the halacha is like Rabbi Kiva? Amar lei. So he answered. So Rabbi answered, he does hold like Rabbi Kiva, but regardless, our Mishnah can't be like Rabbi Kiva anyway. Just because Shmuel passes like Rabbi Kiva, that doesn't mean every Mishnah in Shas goes according to Rabbi Kiva. And our Mishnah here, no matter what you hold, cannot be going according to Rabbi Kiva. Why? Besides this discussion, it says in our Mishnah that if you bought 3 trees and you own now land, and now your canopy grows and is eclipsing and shading the property around, the property of the moicher, you have to cut down those branches. That moicher is ben yafa moicher. Am I shopper? Ha'amar moicher ben yafa moicher. I'm selling ben yafa. I'm going to tell you that when you're not going to chop your trees down. Ben yafa means I'm letting you have everything nicely. So I'm not going to limit the growth of your trees. I'm giving it to you with a generosity. So therefore you're forced to say. So it's not a kash on me why I'm selling on the Mishnah like Rabbanon. I pass like my Rebbe. I pass like Rabbi Kiva. But everybody has to agree that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Kiva. That doesn't mean we don't hold like Rabbi Kiva. Amar Lei, he said, no. You don't have to say that this is Rabbi Kiva. Amor Damar Rabbi Kiva, even Rabbi Kiva's Moicher Ben Yofa has limitations. Amor Damar Rabbi Kiva, but the Moicher Ben Yofa, Gabe Bor Vadus. When you sell a Bor Vadus, there I include access to the property. Why? The bor and dus do not suck anything out of the property, doesn't hurt the property, doesn't damage the property, and has no impact on the property. So there, I'm giving you access. But Gabi Elon Mishamisle, by Elon to give you the right to eclipse and cloud out and shade out my properties, so that now my zroyim that I plant in my property shouldn't go. I never gave you access to mess up my property. I'm not that generous. I'm generous to give you whatever you need to get to your property, but to give you the right to damage my property, even Rabbi Kiva, me loy moidi Rabbi Kiva, isn't Rabbi Kiva moida? If you have a neighbor and your tree is leaning over your friend's property, the halacha is my friend who is impeded by this tree that's growing over from your side onto my property. The halacha is I want to be able to take my plowing rig right up to the border of my field, but I can't because I'm bumping into the branches above. So I'm allowed to chop off all the branches to give me the full height that I need, that your tree won't cause me any impedance, any damage, any difficulty. So you see, Rabbi Kiva, even though there's an in of ayin yofa, there's a limit to that. And avada, even Rabbi Kiva would agree to our Mishnah that I have a right to demand that you cut your things down if it's sticking into my property.
You'll never explain why.
Correct. But I'll call upon him. What right do we have? So therefore, why didn't Rabbi Lazar learn that our mission is going according to Rabbi Kiva? Why did he learn it based on the Rabbanon? That's why Shver, it seems like he doesn't say like Shmuel's Rebbe, because if he said like Shmuel's Rebbe, he would have wanted to learn our Mishnah according to Rabbi Kiva. Okay, but what's the maskon over here? How much space do you have to give around the trees when you sell 3 trees? Tanya Kabas Rabbi Kiva Abba, Hareza Kana Tachtean, Uvainean, Uchutalahem, Kamale, Oyrevisala. You do have to give that amount. So we don't have a maskana as to what exactly is the reasoning for it. But that's the halacha. Amarle Abayel Rabbi Yosy. So Oyson Oyrevisala. So let's think about it. Be'etzem, I don't want to give you the land. Why should I give you extra land? But you need access to be able to harvest your trees very comfortably. But Lamaita, who does the land belong to? In other words, do you just get access to Male Oyrevisala, or do you actually own the land, Male Oyrevisala? What's nafkamina? Mizayron. Who has the right to plant there? It could be you have a right to access it, but I get to plant it. You're going to trample all over it. No, so you'll trample all over it because I have to give you access. But Mahekades is yours, maybe it's mine. So that is a child. The Mola Ervisala, are you actually giving him that land, or you're giving him access to that land? We actually have a price. It says that there's a loch. If I have a big gina and I sell you, and I tell you the inside of the gina, meaning you would have to now walk through my garden in order to get to your garden. So the loch is hachitzon zayresa there. When I sold you the inner garden, I'm also giving you an access to get to that garden through my garden. But I still get to plant on that path that you're going to walk. I'm entitled, the owner who sold it is entitled to plant over there. So, oibazoi, you see that when I have to give you access, I'm not giving you the land, I'm giving you access to the land, but I'm maintaining control of the land. Let's have a look at the Rashbam. Tinitua, the perka moicha peris l'kamon, mishesh l'gina, l'fnim gina shel chaveroi. If you have a gina and you can't get to it only by walking through the gina of your friend, the halacha is that he has to give me access. But the chitzon, it's his property, he got to plant it. So hachanami balasada zayreya saderach klemer oyervisal. So let's compare this to the case of the gina, and therefore we say I'm only giving you access, but avada I could plant over there. Zog to Gemara. I'm sorry. Well, we're going to discuss that in just a brief moment. Zog to Gemara. Amal midami. Hasam leslei seder lelakeach. In the case of the garden, when the lekeach walks through the path that I gave him, that I planted there, the lekeach doesn't care. I'm stamping on this product. Big deal. Aval hocha, but here by the case of the tree, is plated lekeach. You know why? Because if I get the plant by the molar erev asali, that means my pears for my tree are going to fall, and they're going to fall on your seeds that you planted, and the fruits are going to get all muddy because of it. The amalei kamitanfi peri. So here, the lekeach, the person who owns the property with the trees on it, is actually impacted negatively by the fact that the moicher would be able to plant it. So you're camping around from the case of the gina, where there's no harm to the lekeach by the fact that you're planting the access that he was given. So if you want to compare our case of Moli Erev Esaloi, Haloi Dami El L'Seif. The Seif of that brisa discussing the Gina says the following: V'zeh v'zeh Ein Rashoyin L'Zayr. Neither party is allowed to plant in it. What is the Seifa referring to? Zog to Gemara. Holoi Domya. Hod Arvisaloi. The Arvisaloi, where we have a discussion as to who gets to plant there, Loi Domya al Seifa Dahi. It's only comparable to the Seifa of that Bryce with Gina. Da Katani. Not Nuloi Bezdin Derech Minatzad. If there was a negotiated settlement in Bezdin. And Bezdin told the Lakeach and the Moicher, this is where the access will be. That Midash name, it was negotiated between the Moicher and the Lakeach. In that case, when there's a negotiated settlement with Bezdin to determine where that path will be, there neither party is allowed to plant it. Why? Since they had a formal negotiation and there was a specific derech designated, it wasn't this casual that I'm letting you walk through my field, but there was a designated place. What's the big deal if the moicher would plant it? What's the big deal? So instead of walking on flat land, he has to walk through a vegetable patch. It's not a great loss. Yet we still say that the person who gets the access, the fellow who owns the inner gina, has a right to say you're not allowed to plant there. So therefore, the hava kibidashne. Whenever we give you Urvisaloi, that's like we negotiated and we agreed that this radius, specific radius, belongs to the Lokeach. The Mistama Akoni Ilonois, Yesh Lishir Urvisaloi, we know that that's the norm. So it's an identified area that the access will be in. Therefore, and Bava say the Tuva Tinu Pairs. And if the Moicher plants there, it's going to hurt the Lokeach, because if his parents falls there, it's going to make them dirty. Surely there, he's not allowed to plant. So that's how the Gemara wanted to remain. Now we have to. No, I'm sorry, I didn't get. Tanya Kabas Nabaya, we have a brisa that supports Abai Svara, Hareza Kana Tachtein, Uvainen, Vuchuslan, Gemara Vesaloi, and Vize Inon Rashoyin Lazor. So you have support to Abayis saying that this should be compared to a negotiated settlement as to precisely where the access will be, and there, okay, now we have another question. How spread apart or condensed do these trees have to be planted in order that we consider them a property? They have to have a minimum of 4 amos in between them, up to a maximum of 8 amos in between them. That density makes them connected. If they're too close together and they can't be serviced, one's oimit to be uprooted, and therefore this is not called a property. It's called 3 individual trees. But if it's too far apart, they're not connected to one another at all. Rav Amar Rab Nachman Amar Shmuel Mishmoina Batsheshes. To the contrary, they have to be a minimum of 8 apart, up to a maximum of 16 apart. And the Rashbam tells us if it's 16 apart, it's too far apart. It has to be less than 16 apart. Amalei Abai Reb Yosef. Don't argue with Reb Nachman. Don't say if it's more than 8 apart, it's not connected. Rather, say up to 16 amos apart, it's still connected. You know why I'm telling you not to argue with Reb Nachman? The Tanan Masnisin covers it. Because we have a Mishnah, in fact, that says like it. It's not we learned. If now, in order for it to be a kerem, which would now ask you to plant any other zroyim there because of klaya kerem, there has to be the following configuration. You have to have 5 plants, so 4 plants would be a square, and then it would actually form the profile of a dreidel. And then in between 2 of the plants, there's one in the center. So it's a point, it goes wide and it goes up. It's literally the profile of a dreidel. So what if the big square are 16 amos apart? That's not called a kerem. And therefore, mutter lahavi zera l'sha. You're allowed to bring other things there because we don't look at it like it's a kerem. There's 4 or 5 individually planted vines, not a kerem. You're allowed to plant something else there. So you see that's too far apart to be considered one.
One is mumsh at the bottom.
Yeah, one is at the bottom, and then 2 and 2. So imagine you have 4 in a square, and then one right below it. No, not one in the middle. One is Yosy Zonov. Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'aseh b'Talmud. There was a story in Talmud. Be'echad shenot es karmo sheish esrei al sheish esrei amma. And what he did was there were 16 amos apart. 16 amas apart means that you're allowed to plant in between according to Reb Nachman. What did he do? The 16 amas that you measure is not from where it goes into the ground. It's from its canopy. So you need a lot more space. So what would he do? Well, shar stay shurais. I'm not sure if it's sar, if it's shar. Seyar stay shurais litzad v'zayrayas anir. What he would do is 2 rows. He would plant them that all of the growth should grow to the inside. Kim techos, in between these 2 plants, you don't have 16. But in between the next 2 plants, you have full 16 because the other one was also folded over the other way. So basically, he was bunching 2 and 2 together, which means in between them, where it wasn't under those leaves, you had full 16 amas, meaning it wouldn't have been part of the carrot. So and then he would be able to plant with some other plant what's in between them because it's not part of the carrot. The next year, he would join the other 2. This way, he would alternate where he would be planting the other zera. He would be alternating it because once it would be 1 and 2 would be connected, and between 3 and 4, between row 3 and 4, he can plant. The next year he joined 2 and 3, so then he was able to plant between 1 and 2, but he couldn't plant between 2 and 3. So that's how he did it, so that he could equally load and suck nourishment out of the property. And the Chumur matter it. Those if it was 16 apart, they were matter it. As Dr. respond, but if it would have been closer together in 16, they would have answered it. So you see, if it's less than 16, it's still considered one property. So that's a right of Nachman that trees that are separated less than 16 are considered one property, and therefore, if you bought those 3 trees that were spaced less than 16 from each other, it would be including the whole property. He said, I don't know your eyes. Ana ela uvdahava. I have a story. Vidura de Reusa in the city of Dura, or in the city of it was a city of shepherds. Also look at Major Abuda. And he told him, Ziv Havle Kemole Bakar Vekela. He said, just give Mole Bakar Vekela, which we determine is only 4 amas. Well, Hava Yadana Kemole Bakar Vekela Kama Hava. Even the Shemaita of the Tanan. Once I heard this Mishnah that said, Liyita Adam Ilan Samach Lasada Chaverai, Elam can hear min a Dalar Amos. And where does this 4 amas come from? Totally Allah Dalar Amos Sharmu, which Kedeh avoid Zakarem, Amina Shmamina Kamali Bakar Bekele of Dalar Amos. So I hold that it's from 4 amas is the amount of space in between. It's not from 8 to 16. So we'll see this. We'll see the maskana of this tomorrow. But I'll call upon him. We're ending off with a raya to Reb Nachman that up to 16 amas ad v'loyad v'chlal would still be considered one property. And therefore, if you bought trees spaced a little bit less than 16 amas away from each other, it's considered one property, and you bought the whole property.
Yeah, so you said 4, that means 4 and 4, or what?
I'm not sure what you mean.
No book of a Kailov means
4.
between.
As long as there's 4 in between the 2 trees.
Then he has to give it to him. Not 4 for 1, 3 and 4 for that.
You're talking about by Somech L'Sad Chaveri? It says Hirchak within the Dalar Amas. So it's Masha 4 is enough. So maybe it should, maybe if I'm against the Grenades, it's 2 and 2. I'm not sure how that works.
What's given the math? When at verkauft 3 trees, right?
No. Here we're talking about a different case over here. Oh, you're talking about no. The case of Dur Derusa was the case of Dur Derusa was Shemach Echad Chaver Shlosh Ilamis. Lahaya Chas Amas B'Neim. He didn't have it Amas. So that's not like I'm not going to that's be a minimum of 8 amas. And here you see that Rabbi Yehuda said even if it's only 4 amas, which is like the first sheet that we had. That's from 4 to 8. So I just want to. We're trying to understand why there's a Muller Erbers Halal. And Rabbi Lazar had a kasha. We never answered the kasha, so we don't really have a reason at the end for the Muller Erbers Halal. We just have a kasha. Why? But as always. I mean, I didn't finish the Gemara. Maybe the Gemara talks about it more Pegimel, but somewhere that's what we have. Okay, Gavaldik. So we'll stop here, Bez Hashem, and we'll be Mamshech.